Hi, Art. Welcome to Grow and Connect.
Hi, Igor. Thanks for inviting me. I'm really super glad we're getting a chance to connect.
Absolutely. Can we start off with you telling us a little bit about your background, about your journey, and what got you from a tech career into coaching?
That's a long story 'cause I've had a pretty long career, but that's a great question. The way I introduce myself today is I'm a recuperating IT professional, and I've had 28 years in the information technology space. Part of what I do is work with leaders and leadership teams and be their coach, be their executive coach. But I got a little older. I had conversations with my dad who was retiring, and he had trouble articulating what he wanted to do after he retired. And so I got super excited and super interested in kind of wanting to help people who were transitioning from kind of working full time into being retired full time. So my work with leaders and teams in the IT space has helped me work with one-on-one with individuals who are moving from careers into kind of full-time retirement. That's how I got started in this.
Did you help your father out? Can you tell us a little bit more about
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, so good question. And I tried to help my father out. We asked him questions. Hey, Dad, what do you want to do when you retire? And he kind of looked around, smiled at us, and winked his eye. I said, neurosurgery. I said, "Yeah, funny, Dad. Like, yeah, you want to be a neurosurgeon?" Well, he was a neurosurgeon. So basically, he was telling me he didn't want to stop working. And so we asked him again, Dad, really, seriously, what are you going to do when you stop working? Can't be a neurosurgeon your entire life. And he sort of got sad, hung his head, and said he had no idea. And this is a smart person, right? So he's a Fulbright fellow, a neurosurgeon. He could do lots of different things, but he set his mind to. But he never stopped working. And what he did in retirement was he worked until he was 81. Basically, did his last operation until he was 81. Unfortunately, at 82, he passed away. And I have to say, Igor, that I think he missed out on getting to know his kids a little better, getting to know his grandkids a little better because he spent all this time working. And kind of not only did he miss out on that, I really missed out on kind of getting to know my dad as an adult, as that peer-to-peer relationship. And that's really when it struck me is like, how can I help other successful professionals who are their career find meaning and joy outside of their work. And so that's when the bug hit me.
Now that you've been working with clients, what kind of challenges do individuals experience during this transition?
Yeah, so it ranges from the really micro challenges to the macro challenges. And we try to help individuals work on both sets of those. At the bigger level, the macro is like if I'm a physician, like or if, for my dad, for instance, and we know people who have been teachers. I've worked with a teacher who was a 35-year veteran teacher. Once you retire from being a teacher, who are you at your identity, right? So who am I? So that's the macro level, but at a really much smaller level, and they're connected, Igor. Like, how do you introduce yourself at parties? Like, if you're a teacher, hey, I've been a teacher, I've taught for 35 years, awesome. But the day after you stop teaching for 35 years, now who are you? How do you introduce yourself at a party? So the program we work on works at that identity level, and also, how do you introduce yourself to others? That's
Well,
what we do.
wouldn't you introduce yourself as a hi, I'm a retired teacher?
So it's a good question. That's what you used to do, right? And so what do you now want to do? A lot of the research is about you retire to something or you retire with something. I mean, you're sort of living in the past if you say, I used to be a physician, or I used to be an attorney, or I used to be a teacher. But that doesn't really answer the question of who you are now, or, quite frankly, who do you want to become? Because that option is there too.
What are some of the most powerful and surprising insights your clients, discover as they go through your program? How do they answer that question? Who are you after 35, 40 years
Yeah.
working and defining yourself as,
Yeah. And certainly here in kind of the Western world, US, and I've had clients in Europe where, well, part of a program, how do you want to introduce yourself now at parties? In Europe, that's not really a question anyone asks anyone else at parties, right? So you have to really know someone. You introduce yourself as a dad or as a friend or somebody else, and rarely is it your work. The surprising pieces that many of the clients have discovered. For one instance, I had one client who he said, Art, I'm so used to it's like getting up in the morning and raising your hand straight up every day. You get up, you go to work, and you save money, right? This is before retirement. And your hand goes up this way. And then after you retire, you don't save money anymore. You're kind of on the spending side. So now my hand is, instead of going up, it's going sideways. And he said that habit is really, really hard to first recognize and then break. So this is about money. Now, my program doesn't focus on the financial aspects of what do you do to retire, artfully. It's really the non-financial aspects. But that's what he was talking about, the habit of saving money versus now I have to create a new habit of spending money. So that was a surprising piece for him. Like, I got to change my spending habits. That came up for him.
what about more on the defining of who you are? I would imagine that's a struggle. How do you address that, and how do you deal with that?
Yeah, that's much more. I mean, you've been building this persona, this identity, or kind of a narrative, the story of who I am over 50, 60, maybe 70 years in some instances. I'm working with a 69-year-old individual, and they've been working for 60 years, basically, or no, 55 years at this one thing. What is my identity? How do I create this? We appreciate who I was and what I did, but what I did isn't who I am, and it's that identity piece. And you asked me about kind of surprising pieces. It's surprisingly, well, for some people, it's very simple to leave their career and their job behind because that didn't define them. And so clients like that are that basically module 4, we dig into our identity and our purpose and our vision and things of that sort. And so if people have a good grasp on who they were and what they did wasn't part of who they are, it's a different type of kind of engagement we have to help them process in, okay, now what kind of, who do you want to become? Right. I don't know if that makes sense or if that's even getting to your question there, Igor.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, different people have a different relationship with their work, and for everyone, you have to address things a little bit different. It sounds like you have a framework that you've developed that you walk people through, or that you apply to each individual.
Yeah.
And can you share a little bit about that?
Sure. Glad to. So the framework I established this framework when I turned 50. I was in my counseling program. I have a master's in counseling. Part of why I got my master's in counseling was to help me work better with my IT leaders and teams. But it really set me up for kind of this next phase of life that I didn't even realize I was going into back then. So I turned 50. I said, I've got fewer years behind me and fewer years in front of me and a lot more years behind me. I think I need a 30-year plan. So Igor, I developed this kind of this 30-year plan framework in my head about what I wanted to accomplish in the next 30 years, or what I needed to address in the next 30 years. And quite frankly, I was so confident in that 30-year plan, Igor. I waited a full 10 years to start the plan. Okay, so I turned from 50, now I'm 60, and I've got even fewer years in front of me with my plan. And I said, well, now I really need to put some meat on this framework. And so I did 5 modules, organically came up based off my research on reading many books, reading academic articles, kind of my degree in counseling, and kind of Eric Erickson and Piaget about human development. So basically it's 5 modules. The first one is, what do you want to get from the program? And then what do you want to get from retirement? So it's really laying the foundation. What are your goals? Why are you here? What's your motivation? So that's basically module 1. Module 2, we talked a little bit about this earlier. It's really about establishing what are your values. It's like uncovering what you care about. And the values are important because that helps you make decisions about how you spend your time. Right? If family is a value and you're spending time doing something other than working with your family, then maybe family isn't a value. And so we uncover the values. I have a really nice activity called the Wheel of Life, and it looks at kind of a week. What does a week in your life look like, and where do you spend your time there? And then there's pieces about who are you, what are your roles? So dad, sister, mother, neurosurgeon, what are your roles? So that's module 2. So foundation, discovering your true north, as Stephen Covey talked about it. Then kind of the third piece of the framework is, let's look at your work history, your work life. Let's draw out your work timeline and put positive pieces of positive experiences that happen at work above the line, negative things that happen at work, and when you started working to when you stopped working. And so we draw out that timeline, and part of that module is not only what did you work on, but what were your childhood dreams? What did you want to become? And this has been sort of surprising. You asked me what was surprising from working with clients. We all have this deep, still, quiet voice in us, and it's really quiet, and the noise of the career and noise of life gets to chattering. But once that goes away, you can start to listen to, what did I want to do when I was a child? And so sometimes morphing from I wanted to be a ballerina or an artistic director or a painter into some other creative endeavor once they stop their work life. But you can't hear your childhood voice unless things quiet down. So we talk about work, module 3, and then how are you going to celebrate your life as part of that module 3. Module 4 is the hardest one. It's creating meaning. What is your purpose? What is your mission here on this planet? And we talk about connections. So I have a nice activity where are your close connections? Where are your tangential connections? Do they give you energy? Do they sap energy? So that's connections and meaning, module 4. Module 5 is where it all comes together. How are you going to create your next great chapter? What is your narrative? Kind of what experiments do you want to try going forward? And how do you want to live differently, basically? So that's
Okay.
the 5 outline of the 5.
Thanks for sharing.
Sure.
That's definitely a lot to think about. I think some of those things right now in my life, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm at a different stage in my life. I think that perspective is different. I'm not thinking about retirement yet or anything like that. But working with different clients, what has
Mm-hmm.
been a really rewarding experience? Or what has been your experience working with clients that you found rewarding, or in what way have you helped someone to kind of, make the best of that transition?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think kind of the one person pops up immediately is super super successful, kind of in an industry, kind of a separate space in the IT space that was sort of waning. And he said, I've got enough money, Art. I don't need more money. And I'm trying to figure out, do I get certified in, I don't know, AI? Do I get certified? Do I re-up my other certifications? Very organized, very identified with who he was as a professional. And then in module 4 and module 5, module 4, we talk about meaning and purpose, and the module before that, we sort of sketch out the timeline. And he'd already been doing things like that. And he said, connecting the dots between my values and where I spend my time was really, really helpful for me because it gave me insights into how I want to live my life. And so that was really rewarding. He sent me a really nice note about how helpful the program was, and that was one of one of my favorite clients that stood out to me.
Figuring out your values and living your life according to your values, that sounds like advice that is good to take at any age, right? Or at any
Oh yeah.
point in your life. But do you think it may be easier to do when someone is nearing retirement?
It's easier in the sense, well, I talked about like when I turned 60, I had fewer years in front of me. And one of my dad's favorite lines for me, it wasn't a positive thing. I was 12 years old and I just putter away and fritter away my time, right? But that's different as a 12-year-old boy, frittering away time, like wasting an afternoon, versus being a 72-year-old adult, right? You're wasting time, wasting an afternoon. How many more afternoons do you have? And so I think the motivation, if you understand, we all have an expiration date. We don't know when that is. If you sort of lost my train of thought, you're more motivated to say, I want to really lean into who I am, which is my values. I want to spend time with family and friends, which, by the way, all the research suggests that that's what makes a happy and fulfilling life. I wasn't able to do that because I was a surgeon or because I was traveling around the world or I was a CEO. But now I'm motivated because I know there's an end date there and it's much closer than I really want it to be. And so I think it's simpler because people see the value of I better start today because I'm not going to be younger than I am today.
That's what I kind of figured. Be more pressing at an older age, at a different stage than when you're younger. 'Cause you don't appreciate things. You still think, oh, okay, I have my whole life ahead of me. I still have all
Right.
this time. And then, like you said, eventually when you think, well, I have more days behind me than I do ahead of me, you start to think about things differently.
Yeah, there's a switch that flipped for me when I was 50, like I said. And it doesn't flip for everybody, but more often than not, that seems to be halfway to 100, people start to
Hmm.
really start thinking about, ooh, like, what will I do?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what are your biggest challenges right now in growing Retire Artfully, your business?
Thank you for asking. That's a really good question. It's the answer I give, or people end up figuring out when I work with them as a executive or a leadership coach. What's the biggest problem, Igor? It's like sometimes it's between the middle of my ears, right? It's me and me committing to too much outside of my Retire Artfully. I still have my executive coaching business. I'm trying to wind that a little bit lower and lower and lower and wind this up, and not ever having a kind of a retirement planning or retirement advising business. I'm not exactly sure of the steps. And so I'm working with my marketing, Doodling Pandas, by the way, a great organization to help me think about my social media presence and what are the steps I can do in social media presence. Do I want to be just the local expert here? I'm in Raleigh, North Carolina. Do I want to be the local expert, or do I want to go more broadly across the US and then across the globe? So this year has been establishing my credibility, posting regularly. I have retirement tip Tuesdays. Please follow me if you can, and you get those tips out every Tuesday. But then where do I take it from there? And so it's me when I look back in the mirror sometimes, Igor. I don't know if you experience that on your own, but that's me.
What's your favorite social media platform? Where are you posting? Where are you most active right now?
So great questions. I am probably in Facebook is where, and that's for older folks like me, right? So Retire Artfully, at Retire Artfully, Facebook and Instagram, and then LinkedIn as well. LinkedIn, my longer posts go there. I have some specifically for physicians, um, and kind of this. I've got an upcoming series I plan to launch at the beginning of 2026 about those who are struggling with retirement and what can you do to help reduce the struggle. So Facebook and then Instagram and LinkedIn.
And if someone would like to find you, what's your on the internet and contact you, they
Yep,
could do it through those channels, but do you have a website for Retire Artfully? What is that?
I do. I like it's get a pen and paper because it's retireartfully.com. And so you can always sign up for the newsletter there, get on the mailing list. I'm very abstemious with how much I email people. And so, but I try to give people useful information they can use as they think about transitioning to retirement. So retireartfully.com is the home base.
Great. Well, thank you, Art, for coming on the show and telling us about retiring artfully and sharing your framework and your wisdom. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you being asked. And so it's been lovely to be here. Thank you very much.